My name is Dr. Alan Bainbridge. I work in the Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Education at Canterbury Christ Church University. This video is going to be about a piece of research we've done that was a case study on selective education policy that gave us insight into how MPs respond to research evidence in the Houses of Parliament.
My name is Tom Tropy. I'm also on the Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Education here at Christ Church University.
And the article was also supported and joint written by Joanne Bartley from the campaigning group Comprehensive Future.
Alan, could you talk about the motivation behind the paper?
The paper is motivated initially by an activist stance and then supported by our academic background. I have for many years been a member of Comprehensive Future. It's a campaigning group to bring an end to selective education. And as a campaigning group, we have continually come up against the problem of presenting evidence about selective education to our elected members in Parliament or our elected members at local level, and how that evidence is repeatedly rejected. So we became quite concerned about how evidence is used to make education policy decisions, particularly in a time when our politicians are telling us that education should be based on evidence. And this was the problem we were looking at solving, because the evidence base around selective education is almost exclusively that this is not a good thing. It's quite a difficult piece of research to do, and I'm going to ask Tom to explain how we found out about how parliamentarians use evidence in parliamentary debates. Tom.
Thank you, Alan. From the motivations that you described, we proceeded with a critical realist perspective and dug into the Hansard record of 11 parliamentary debates using in vivo software to identify themes. We further analyzed these themes using descriptive statistics and argumentative analysis. Within the debates, we found policymakers using rhetorical tools to avoid educational research evidence, including the deployment of a technique identified in previous research as a moral sidestep. In this case, the repeated discursive communication that grammar schools are good schools provided a way to avoid more substantive engagement with evidence. We further then tested this good schools discourse with a playful, carnivalesque extrapolation of the data as a way of critically considering or warranting the purported evidence generated by the discourse. And Alan, what do you think is the most important aspect of the paper?
I think there are a number of really important things that have come out of this that we won't have time to go through in a short video like this. But one particularly important area is to try and get an understanding of what sort of evidence it is that has, I suppose a phrase I would use would be traction. What's the evidence that has traction to policymakers? And in the context of that, what sort of evidence and how should academics be researching to produce evidence to present to parliamentarians? So
when considering the methodology for this research,
yes,
one of the things that we had in mind was that even though we were looking at a very small case, that it was more broadly applicable to other educational research and educational policy making and the way it is crafted in Parliament, and that our research might inspire future research in terms of how these processes are looked at. Are there any other provocations that come out of this, Alan?
I think there are, and I think it's a fundamental finding of the paper, and that is it questions the very functioning of our representative democracy. We have members of Parliament, we have people who are responsible for making policy, claiming that policy is based on evidence, when in the case of this particular policy, it's clearly not based on evidence. We know there are times when parliamentarians do respond to evidence, because we have evidence of that. But there is a really serious question here to ask about the functioning of a parliamentary democracy that isn't clear, and in particular one of the areas that's not clear is the balance between the use of evidence and the moral assumptions or values that people are drawing on to make their decisions for policy. I don't think we can always expect everything to be purely evidence-based, but it would be, I think, only democratic for our parliamentarians, for our policymakers, to be clear about what moral stance they make. The quality of debate in Parliament does not seem to be very strong at all and doesn't live up to the standards that parliamentarians expect us as researchers or teachers to live up to. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to find out more about our research, then please follow the links to read the article in Reviewer of Education.